Network.
Tampa Bay's Tan Talk, entertaining and informative radio for the Sunshine State.
Looking for car shows? Then look no further than FLACarshows.com. On your computer or on your mobile device, FLACarshows.com is a comprehensive list of automotive events, plus videos and news articles. Whether you're looking for car shows, cruise-ins, meetups, automotive festivals, cars and coffees, or anything else relating to an internal combustion engine, then this is a site for you. Check it out online or on your phone at FLACarshows.com.
You may be owed some money. After 911 and 411, call 541. That's 727-541-1741. Call Gulfstream Motorsports for a diminished value report. Due to my 28 years experience in the auto salvage business, I'm very good with wrecks. So if your car's been involved in a wreck, call me for a diminished value report. Call 727-541-1741. You may be owed some money for the lost value of your repaired vehicle. And visit us at GulfstreamMotorsports.com.
Sicily is a world apart, a place like no other.
Attenzione, attenzione! Caro umane, ci sono le corse in automobili! Vite attaccate in casa, cani, picciriddi, porci e galline. Muore a conto suo, sindaco se ne scotola!
The Targa Florio was the first road circuit race of its kind. The most grueling test of man and machine.
It was fast and dangerous and beautiful, all in one go.
It stirred emotions like never before.
Tutta la mia vita era colma di una passione, muovendomi dal passato per vedere nel futuro.
The most influential event in Sicily and the motor racing world.
What the Targa Florio offered you was more corners, more gear changes, more braking, and a very high top speed at the end of it on the 4-mile straight back to the pits. And so manufacturers could come here and they could test all of their latest developments here. So special gearboxes, special brakes, everything got a fantastic workout during the motor race.
What a big success, and the people, people, bravo Vincenzo Florio, my name, my land, my idea.
Vincenzo was feverishly collecting cars and needed an expert to drive them and to look after them. When Fiat sent their top mechanic, Felice Nazzaro, to Sicily with one of their machines, Vincenzo knew that he had found his man.
Può rimanere qui. Potresti fare il mio meccanico, il mio autista.
Sì.
Sì.
In the second year, Nazzaro won the race for Vincenzo, and by 1913 was building cars himself, with immediate success.
What do you think, Francesco? Pretty bloody marvelous, eh? What a great old car.
We journeyed on in a Nazzaro just like the Targa winner of 1913. All these machines were so exotic and alien, the Sicilians were captivated by what they saw.
It was fast and dangerous and beautiful, all in one go.
This is La Targa Florida.
And now...
Hey, Rocky, watch me pull a rabbit out of my hat.
Again?
Button up my sleeve. Presto! No doubt about it. I gotta get another hat.
Now here's something we hope you'll really like.
This is Art Morrison from Art Morrison Enterprises, and you're listening to Nostalgic Radio and Cars.
Okay, listeners, welcome. You're tuned into Nostalgic Radio and Cars, and I'm your show host, Robert. Run your computers and Google TAN-Talk 1340.com. You can see us live here in studios in downtown Clearwater. Don't forget to check out our website, GulfstreamMotorsports.com, where you can find out all about us. And if you want to see our past 615, this is going on 616 shows, go to nostalgicradioandcars.com. Good evening, Bobby. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. How about you?
Am I coming out loud and clear? Because I was trying to, adjust the mic here a little bit. There we go. Okay. I kind of like having this coffee cup here because it kind of puts it right where a good level. I don't have to touch it. I just have to talk into it.
That's the goal.
That's the goal. Yeah. I had a little experience with that over the last 12 some odd years. God, 12 years, over 12 years. Anyway, hey, we got an exciting show for you tonight. We got two guests coming on. Of course, this weekend, starting tomorrow in Orlando, is the summer edition of Meekum's collector car auction. They got some pretty interesting cars on there. So in a few minutes, we're going to have John Kraman on. He's the voice of Meekum. And so he'll tell us about some of the highlights. I was talking to somebody today, and you're seeing a lot of collections come up. And usually the collections are because somebody's got, they kind of either they've decided to move on to the big collector car world in the sky, or they've just kind of like come to the realization that they kind of need to thin the herd, and there's nobody really there that wants to be a caretaker. And so you're going to see more and more of these collections. Of course, on the other hand, you're going to see a lot of barn finds because you're going to see a lot of guys that have, like myself, getting up in age, and then, a few more years are going to go, you know what, I'm not so sure I can wrench on this anymore. That guy called me today out of Palatka, Florida, and he's got a 64 Galaxy. He's had a number of cars. He was pretty much in the early 60s Ford, 60, 61, 62, 63, and 64. He said, this is my last one. I'm 76 years old. And he was calling me for parts because I still deal in classic and antique cars and parts, obviously. And then I do appraisals. But I had some few little 64 Galaxy goodies laying around. And so he inquired me whether I had them or not. And so we're going to touch base and see if we can help this guy out and help him finish his car. Hey, I'm delighted to welcome my special guest to this show this evening. And this gentleman's been on our show many, many times. We've become friends over the years. And he is also widely known as the voice of Meekum. I'm delighted to welcome to the show, John Kraman. John, how are you this evening?
Hey, good, man. Everything's good. We're getting revved up for Orlando, brother.
When you do a knockdown drag out show in January, 3,000 plus cars.
Yep.
And it's hard to believe that there's that many cars out there, but there is, because there's 300 million people in this country. And I would say a big percentage of those guys are car guys. And now we have this, we're kind of like fortunate to have you guys come back in the summertime. And we got 1,500 cars coming through this time. So, and some pretty amazing stuff. There's three in particular that caught my attention. One's a 66 Shelby GT350, lot S110. Another one happens to, I think I know whose car this is, one of my customers, 1959 Impala convertible S131, and a 1960 Edsel two-door F90 and a 78 Bronco F102. Now, these are four cars that kind of caught my attention, but I want you to tell us about some of the really, really cool stuff that's coming through as well.
Well, I think one of the stars of the show is really the it car, the performance car from the 1980s, the poster child, literally, especially when you're talking American performance cars, the one-year-only 1987 Buick Grand National GNX. We've got one with under 60. You heard me right, under 60 original miles. It is essentially as new condition, and I'm expecting somewhere in the $200,000 range for that car.
The GNX back in the day, and I remember when that car came out, supposedly it was, limited production. The FBI got a bunch of those cars, and it was the fastest production car made in 1987. The GNX now. We're talking about the Grand National GNX, right?
Right. Yeah, talk about the GNX. You know, the Grand National itself, great performer, but the GNX takes that to a completely different level. The folks at ASC and McLaren took literally a $15,000 Grand National. That's what they stickered for new. Ended up with doubling the price. In 1987, GNX was about a $30,000 window sticker car. Only 547 of those were produced. A lot of changes to the car. Fender flares, wheels, suspension, of course, the engine. Had a lot of tweaks to that turbocharged 3.8-liter V6, rated at 276 horsepower. Doesn't sound like much, but the performance of this car greatly exceeded what that kind of modest horsepower rating is. As I said earlier, if you're talking American cars from the 1980s, this car really is at the top of the collector heap. And the fact that this car was under 60 original miles, the downside is nobody will ever be able to enjoy that performance, because this car will go from one collector to another, as an example, as an investment grade car that will strictly be available for show and never to drive to cruise nights and have out on the street. Not going to happen.
Now, I'm glad you brought that up, okay, because I had this discussion with Jay Leno here 6 months ago when he was on our show. What are your thoughts on that? On a car, you just hit it on the nail. It will never be driven. It'll go from collector to collector, maybe museum to museum, and it'll just become a piece of road art, so to speak. So it kind of takes the fun out of it, don't you think?
Well, it does, but there's a whole culture of car collector out there that really enjoys acquiring cars of this caliber, the absolute examples that are the finest of the fine. And I guess over the long haul, in a way, it's good that brand new examples of these important, significant landmark cars are going to be preserved for future generations. But frankly, my little modest car collection, my cars are all drivers. Mm-hmm. And the satisfaction that I get out of acquiring, maintaining, and literally driving, even if it's only 500 to 1,000 miles a year, which is pretty typical, that to me, that all adds to the enjoyment. But there's deep-pocketed folks out there that want the best of the best. And as the old adage goes, they're only original once. So there are plenty of examples out there of GNXs that have some miles on them that can be driven. And I wouldn't be surprised that a collector of this, the buyer of this car, if he's really into the GNX mystique, he probably will have one he can drive as well as one he can have in his collection and, show at the high-end shows. I guess it's okay, is what I'm saying. Not my cup of tea, but hey, what are you going to do?
It's interesting that you said that, because I've actually run into collectors that's exactly what they do. They got let's just say it's a Porsche or a Ferrari or a muscle car, some kind of Shelby. They got a flawless piece, which they just basically sit there, have a glass of wine and stare at. And then they've got one that they basically put racing fuel in and they go out and terrorize the neighborhoods with.
Yeah, and you need almost to have kind of a happy balance. These old cars like this 87 GNX with under 60 miles, that's one thing. A car like that this car is not going to be driven. We know that. We just have to we just have to understand that. But that represents a small percentage of the overall car collector strategy. Most people, whether they're original cars or restored cars, they drive them a little bit, they enjoy them, they share them with other people at shows, but yet at the same time, they're not going out and driving them in the rain. They're not, using them as a daily driver. They're preserving them, but they are operating the cars. And to me, honestly, that really represents, I think, the bulk, maybe 80-90% of the typical car collector out there, as opposed to just those guys that like to buy them, look at them, let them sit, and then sell them every once in a while and keep their inventory churning.
So tell us about some of the other cars that are going to be highlighted. Now, in the summertime, you've got, I think, if I looked at the roster, it's something like 1,500 cars. Are there collections in this, or is this pretty much all individual cars in this particular auction here this summer?
No, there's a handful of really good collections as well as individual consignments. And one of the collections that I think is one of the most fascinating ones is a motorcycle collection with about 15 motorcycles. And all those are going to be selling at no reserve, by the way. And the reason that I mention that, Robert, is just to really let your listeners know that a Mecum auction is not all about Corvettes and muscle cars and resto mods and hot rods and 50s chrome and fin era cars. really are capturing the spirit of the entire vehicle collecting world. And that would include late model exotics, vintage exotics, motorcycles, as well as, what you might consider to be traditional Mecum inventory. This has been our strategy for about the past 10 years. And it's one of the reasons why we've grown to be the world's largest collector vehicle auction company, is because we really literally welcome all groups, all collections, vehicles, collector vehicles of all types. We do not discriminate.
Which other cars in that group kind of strike your fancy? I always have to ask you that. Is there anything in particular? I mean, and then how often do you actually sit there? I mean, this has got to be a terrible temptation. You're sitting up there on the block, you're narrating, and you see this gorgeous stuff come by, and you go, "Damn, I'd really like to have that." But
happens all the time. And I learned, now that we're in our 15th year of television coverage, and I've been with Mecum myself personally since 2006. That temptation has reared its head many, many, many times. And the last time it paid off and I succumbed to it was actually Kissimmee, Florida, 2016, where I bought my wife a 1972 Corvette. We'd been looking for a couple of years for a really great example. It's a Bloomington Gold car with 30,000 miles. It's all original. It's an absolute cream puff. So I guess to answer that directly before I tell you about a couple other cars that I like, you really have to have a lot of self-control and understand that you have to keep your purchasing, or at least my purchasing, down to cars that are really important to me, because you can't have them all. And once I have them, I tend to covet them and keep them for a long time, if not forever. So right now there's no holes in the garage, 6-car garage. It's completely full. And so there's no room for anything else, which in a way is good. But that having said, there are a couple of cars that really got me cranked up. And I have to say, maybe the one that stands out more than anything else is a 1965 Ford Mustang. We think, well, that's cool, but there's a lot of Mustangs. This is the holy grail of non-Shelby 1965 Mustangs. It's a convertible, very, desirable, important car there. Red with a red interior. It's a 4-speed, but most of all, it's a factory K code. That means that 271 horsepower, 289, top of the performance heat in the early years of the Ford Mustang. This could very well be a $100,000 little Mustang convertible, primarily due to the colors, the condition, and that legendary K-code engine option.
And is there, now I know you're more of a Corvette guy, is there potentially a K-code Mustang in your future?
Well, I own a Mustang, a 2014 Mustang GT I bought new with the Coyote.
Oh, okay.
With the 6-speed. So yeah, I like Corvettes. So I kind of like, I like a variety of vehicles, but I have a Pontiac GTO from '64. I've owned that car since 1976 when I was 19.
Oh wow!
I've got three Corvettes, and I've got the Mustang and some motorcycles and a daily driver. So, well, 2 if you count my wife's car. So, like I say, the garage is full, and that's helpful when I've got temptation. But, I've been lucky over the years to really think about and identify what are the specific cars that are really important to me. And over the years, I've acquired those and kind of checked those boxes off. But there's something about that little K-code Mustang. You mentioned Corvettes. There's a couple of what I would call, I guess, bookends. There's a 1990 ZR1 Corvette. That was the first year of the Generation 4 car. Mm-hmm. That exotic 375 horsepower engine. Wasn't the first ZR1, but it was the first in this Generation 4 lineup that ran all the way through 1995. And if you fast forward to the modern era to 2019, the C7, 1 year only, the final year of the C7, we've got a ZR1, the most powerful, quickest, fastest Corvette in the history of Corvettes, even to this day, even with the C8, at a whopping 755 horsepower. Those are the Corvette bookends I'm going to be paying some attention to.
We talked about this. Now, how many auctions is Mecum doing a year? I think last time we talked, or that we actually covered the subject, it was like 15 auctions a year. How many are you up to now?
That's exactly right. We've got 15. We've already got 4 auctions in the book so far. We've got 11 more to go, including Orlando will be, in this order, will be in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, Monterey, California, Dallas, Texas. We've got a collection auction up in Fountain City, Wisconsin at the Elmer's Auto and Toy Museum. So many items there, that'll be 4 full days. We've got Chicago, Schaumburg in October, and Chattanooga, Tennessee, Robert, on the same weekend. You heard me right. 2 collector car auctions on the same weekend. First time in Mecum history, we're splitting our crew right down the middle. We're doing both auctions. One will be televised. That will be the Chicago auction, our Chattanooga auction, which is in conjunction with the Chattanooga Motor Car Festival, by the way. That will be non-televised, but will be available at Mecum.com for streaming. We'll be Las Vegas in November, and our tradition is to finish out the year in Kansas City in December, and then we rev up again, and we go to Kissimmee in January, and we start the 2023 schedule all over again. It is a huge, huge undertaking to plan and execute these auctions. And, this Mecum team, you got to give them a bunch of credit for the ability to, travel around the country, putting these major events on, and watching it on TV makes it all look like it's seamless. I can tell you, it's a lot of folks behind the scenes making all that happen. About 300 people it takes to run one of our auctions.
Whoa, that's a sizable staff. All right, so this weekend, we start basically tomorrow through Saturday, and if people want to find out more about it, get tickets, show up, give us the rundown. Yep,
Mecum.com will give you all the information that you can imagine and then some. Gates open every day out there at the Orange County Convention Center. That is the big convention center downtown Orlando. We'll open at 8 o'clock every day. The auction will start about 9 o'clock. It'll go probably till, maybe mid-evening, 6, 7 o'clock. It ends when the last car crosses the block. Tickets at the door, $30 in advance, or $30 at the door, and kids 12 and under free. And television coverage on Motor Trend TV and Motor Trend Plus, the streaming service, will be on both cable and streaming. We'll kick off on this Friday at 12 noon, where we're putting together a total of 12 hours live. But we encourage your folks that are listening and within striking distance of Orlando to head on over and see it in person. Nothing like being there and seeing all the cars and the action and the dynamics that occur when the world's best collector cars cross the block, basically one every 90 seconds. Wow. Well, John, thank you for showing up again and hanging out with us here at Nostalgic Radio and Cars. I will see you this weekend for sure, Friday, Saturday sometime, and wish you guys all the best of luck, and take care. Say hi to everybody over there. All right. You got it, my friend. See you this weekend. We will. Thank you. I want to thank my good friend, John Craman, the voice of Mecum, for hanging out with us, telling us about the auction this weekend. So, hey, guys, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. Bob's going to fire up the stereo. We're going to play a little Badfinger. We had Joey Mullen on last week, and he was one of the lead guitarists for Badfinger. This is a song that he wrote. It's called Suitcase. It's just got a groovy beat to it. It's really far out. So, hey, you're tuning into Nostalgic Radio and Cars. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.
Tie me down. Money for fun, yeah. Golden crowns. Well, it's all inside a game we've been playing so long. Driver, go too fast. Miser, make it last. Pusher, on the road. Let's all inside a game we've been playing so long. Well, I'm sorry to believe it. That's all I get to say. I'm sorry to believe in today. That's all I get to see. I'm sorry to believe in today. Driver, go too fast. Miser, make it last. Pusher, on the run. It's all inside a game we've been playing so long.
Racing's important to men who do it well. When you're racing, it's life. Anything that happens before or after, just wait.
Hey, I'm Christy Lee from All Girls Garage and Barrett Jackson on Velocity, and you're listening to Nostalgic Radio and Cars.
We're back, and you're tuned into Nostalgic Radio and Cars, and I'm your show host, Robert, and we're going to be on the air in a few minutes with our next special guest. And so we're looking forward to that. Now, Meekum is, now, if you go in January is at the Heritage Park, which is out there basically east of Kissimmee. This is going to be downtown, the Orlando Convention Center, I believe off High Drive. So should be exciting. I didn't make it there last year, but I'm going to definitely make it there this year because you know how it is in this business. Every once in a while you get some scheduling conflict. But anyway, it's time to introduce our special guest for the evening. This gentleman is an author, a photographer. He's got a couple books to his credit. Sebring and the Road Atlanta, a book on Road Atlanta and a book on Daytona. And I'm going to have him on here and he's going to tell us about those. And he's also got a Facebook page, which I didn't realize he was associated with, but it's a very, very good one. It's called The Glory Days of Racing. I'm delighted to welcome, here's a familiar name, Harry Hurst. Harry, how are you?
I'm good, Robert. How are you?
Now, do you often get confused with, Hurst and Harry Hurst and all those guys, back in the day?
Well, I frequently was asked in earlier days, are you related
right
to Hurst shifters? I will say that is becoming less and less common as we get older, and remembering Hurst shifters becomes a thing of the past. But I'll tell you a funny story. I was at Road Atlanta for the WTAN-AM, and it was the first time I actually had ever seen Linda Vaughn. And I was 19 years old, just snotty little kid kind of thing. And I thought, and I never ever went up and talked to drivers or people like that. I just never had the gumption to do that. But for some reason, I walk up to Linda Vaughn and I say, "Hi, I'm Harry Hurst. I think we may be related." And she looks at me with this direct stare, and she says, "I don't think so." So that was my after that. I never tried using the Hurst name as a connection, but
all right. So now you're basically are you originally from the Tampa Bay area?
Yeah. Grew up in the Hyde Park area of Tampa, and went to school there. Went up to Florida State. Graduated in '72, and had an English sports car repair shop in Tallahassee for a number of years, and then moved up to Philadelphia in the late '70s, and that's where we've been ever since.
So you're a car guy.
Yeah, from early days of the early '60s, slot car racer over at Chan's Hobby Shop for any of those Tampa people that are listening that remember Chan's on Henderson. And then I was very fortunate to have parents that were tolerant of my addiction to racing as a teenager. And they actually, my dad, who was an accountant at the time, took time off in the height of tax season to drive us over to Sebring in 1965. Now, this is a time when accountants work 24 hours a day, but he took Saturday afternoon off. We got there right after the rain stopped. That was the year of the Great Deluge. And that was the first time I got to see in person Chaparrals, Cobra Daytona Coupes, Ford GTs, all these cars I had only read about in the magazines, and that just cemented it. And I got interested in photography. Went to the races, took pictures, and just by luck, through a friend of mine by the name of John Annis, who still lives in Tampa, I was introduced to the press secretary at Sebring, and he asked me if I'd like to take pictures for him, and I said, sure. So at the age of 19, I became track photographer for the Sebring 12-hour race, and it was, I got to tell you, even then, we pinched ourselves because we knew that those were very, very special days. With the Porsche 917s, the Ferrari 512, all of that. Mark Donahue, Mario, Dan Gurney. We knew these were unique times, and so we made the best of it. And you mentioned, I later did a book on the 1970 Sebring using my photos and telling the story of that very unusual race. As you know, Steve McQueen, driving with a broken left ankle, almost won the race. And it took Mario Andretti jumping into the second place Ferrari and chasing down McQueen's co-driver, Peter Revson, who really was the reason they were in a position to win. But he chased down Peter Revson and won by 23 seconds after racing for 12 hours.
Now, wait a minute. I got to ask you this. Now, you are the first person. So you were actually there in 1970. So that's basically what happened. So Mario blew up his Ferrari. So they stuck him in the other car. And there were 3 or 4 laps down.
Yeah.
And he literally caught Peter Revson. And was the Ferrari that much faster? And it was only like you said, a few seconds that he actually passed him. What was it, back in turn 17 at Carousel, or before that on the back straight, and won the race?
Yeah, let me tell you, because even that part is pretty interesting.
Okay.
You have to realize that Peter Revson and Steve McQueen were driving a Porsche 908, so that's a little 3-liter car.
2-year-old car, race car, by the way, right?
Exactly. And so under normal circumstances, it never would have been in a position to win. But Sebring is a car killer, and all of the Gulf Porsches retired, the Salzburg Porsches retired. And the leading 512 retired, as you said. Mario's car, which had led up until 9 p.m., had a transmission problem and fell out. So, a 512 coupe was sitting there in second place, and Mario Forgari, the Ferrari team manager, comes up to Mario. Mario was getting ready to go over to his airplane, which was over on the north-south runway, and fly back to Nazareth because he had a race the next day. Sebring is run on a Saturday. He had a dirt track race at Langhorne at Nazareth on Sunday. So he was getting ready to leave. And Forgari comes over and says, "Hey, look, jump. I want you to get in the second place car and see what you can do." And I interviewed Mario for my book, and he said, "I drove like a man possessed and chased down Peter Revson." Peter was really tired. He did the majority of the driving.
Mm-hmm.
Steve McQueen did a good portion of it. Many people say he hardly drove at all. That's not true. He drove over 5 hours of the 12. But they kept Revson in the 908 at the end, hoping that they could hold off Andretti, but he just couldn't. The 512 5-liter car was faster than the 3-liter Porsche. And so Andretti chases him down, passes him. At that point, the fuel reserve light comes on in Mario's car. And he had been going so fast and driving it so hard that he was not getting good fuel economy. So he pulls into the pits, and they have to get out of the car in those days to refuel. So Forgari pulls him by the epaulets, drags him out of the car. They put enough gas in the car to finish the race. They throw him back in, and he zooms out of the pits just at the same time that Revson comes by on the straightaway. And again, within a lap or two, Andretti was able to pass him. I'm not sure where he passed him, probably on the north-south runway on the back side. But he passed him and won by 23 seconds. That was the closest endurance race victory, at Sebring up until that time. Now, today, of course, I was just at Sebring this last year photographing the race. And those guys go flat out the entire race. And I think the race was decided, what was it, 4.5 seconds or something like that. It's crazy what they do today. I mean, it's really a whole different level than the way it used to be. when you wanted to nurse your car, because most of the race cars wouldn't last for 12 hours of flat out racing. So it's a whole different ball game today.
Well, like you said, part of it's a runway. It was particularly when you get around turn 11 and 12 there, the carousel, that the transitions in the track, and I've autocrossed there before and club race, it beats the crap out of you because and then coming around turn 1, there's always, I forget who said it, there's the monster turn 1. That part of the track too is pretty nasty. It'll beat the crap out of you back there too. So it takes its toll on the cars.
Well, yeah, and the drivers, as you mentioned, I did the Skip Barber School there a number of years ago, and it was the first time I'd ever actually driven on the course, and we're in those little formula cars they had there, and I come around there, turn 12, which for your listeners, it's a 180-degree turn, and Sebring is built on an old World War II training base, so the concrete there is, 50, 60 years old, if not more now. And the concrete is flat, but it's the expansion joint where the concrete comes together.
The transitions.
So you go over that stuff in that turn, and I couldn't believe it. My eyeballs were vibrating. I couldn't see any landmarks because it was just knocking around. But luckily there was that orange pylon at the entrance to the pits. And so the pits were to the right and the track was to the left. And all you could do is look at that orange blur and kind of stay to the left of it. And you knew you were going to be on the track. But I mean, other than that, you couldn't see anything. And you think, well, these guys are doing this for 12 hours in 100-degree weather, because, even in March, Florida can be a bear. And I cannot imagine what they did. I also did a book on the 65 Sebring, and in there, one of the drivers talks about driving one of the Cobra Daytona coupes, and he literally had heat prostration while he was in the car because it's a closed coupe, and he barely managed to get into the pits. Once he got into the pits, he couldn't get out of the car. They had to actually open the door and drag him out because he had passed out from heat exhaustion. And I mean, that's what those guys they didn't have cool suits, like the drivers have today. It was brutal. Sebring was a killer of a racetrack.
All right, so 1965, that was the rain that came supposedly late in the afternoon, and there's pictures of the spare tires when they're changing tires floating away in the pit area. So you were there the whole time. What was it like? When did the rain happen? Late in the afternoon?
Late in the afternoon. That was the year my parents drove us down.
Right.
I actually got there right after the rain, but I did the book on it with Dave Friedman's photographs.
Okay.
You may know Dave.
Right.
One of the great
Cobra guy. Shelby, photographer, right.
And so it started, around, 4 or so. And of course, the Chaparral was well in the lead by then. And the rain came, and they said that, they were floating. The cars out on the track couldn't even, the fast cars couldn't go that fast. But the little Porsches and the Sprites, because at Sebring at that time, you had a wide variety of automobiles that raced.
Mm-hmm.
Everything from Ferraris down to, little MG midgets on the track at the same time. Well, the MG midgets loved the rain because their little narrow tires went right through.
Mm-hmm.
They said, they were passing Ford GTs and stuff like that left and right. But it eventually stopped around sunset, and the water drained away. And then, they were able to finish the race. But it came, the Chaparral came very close to getting flooded out. In fact, they brought the car in and just parked it in the pits for about half an hour because they were afraid that, they were just going to flood the engine and not be able to even finish the race.
So were you there also in 69 too? When did you start doing the photography? Was that
69?
69. Okay. So 69 was also a pretty exciting race. And I think the Ford GT won that year, didn't it?
That was, and not only any Ford GT, that there are a handful of race cars that are as famous as the drivers. And that car that won Sebring in 1969, was chassis number 1075. That car won Le Mans in 1969 or 68, and then repeated it in 69. It also won, I believe, 5 other endurance races. So it is by far the winningest Ford GT40 of all time, and a very, very famous car.
Now, Jackie Ickx was driving it, and I forget who the co-driver was. It might have been Pedro Rodriguez. That was
Jackie Oliver.
Jackie, okay, and that was at Le Mans. Were they driving at Sebring and Daytona as well?
Yep.
That car?
Yep.
Okay, and then 68. Now, it seems to me that either Brian Redman or David Hobbs, one of the guys was in one of the Ford GTs. Was it? They weren't in that car, was it?
Well, at Le Mans, that was the year Pedro Rodriguez won.
Okay.
In 1075, and held off Hans Hermann in one of the. I think it was 68. I may be wrong.
I think you're right, Nick, because that was a 908 Porsche that they held off.
Yeah. Yep.
And I think that was the car that Steve McQueen drove in 70, wasn't it?
Boy, I'm going to have to look at it.
I used to, because, and I want to reflect also on your Glory Days of Racing Facebook page, because actually it's fairly educational, because when I see pictures in there, I got to Google them real quick, and then I got to go, okay, because, to me, and then I also want to get into Can-Am at Road Atlanta, because to me, Can-Am racing was the epitome of racing. Although I'm a Shelby Boss guy, I love the Mustangs, I love Trans Am racing, but Can-Am was just all out racing. I mean, no rules. It was so.
They had four tires and enclosed bodywork and 2 seats, and that was pretty much it. They tried to keep it that way. Now, Jim Hall, of course, called their bluff, and the race that I did the book on was the 1970 Road Atlanta Can-Am, and it was one of the few times that Jim Hall's sucker car, the 2J, appeared. And when he said, "Look, I designed that car with the Can-Am rules and the spirit of the Can-Am in mind, that there were no rules. So how can you ban me if there are no rules?" Well, it's a long story, but I will tell you this, that the car originally had been designed at General Motors R&D. And when they designed it, the fans were vertical, so the air exited going up. Well, when Jim redid the car down at his shop in Midland, he made it horizontal so that the fans exited out the back. And that was the very first race at Road Atlanta, so the track was green. There was a lot of debris on the track, of course, that red Georgia clay. And man, I'll tell you, when that car picked up some dirt and stuff on the edge of the track, it blew it right out the back into the face of the drivers, and it was not fun.
It was a vacuum cleaner.
Well, it was a vacuum cleaner for sure, and it you could really argue that it was potentially a very serious safety problem. Now, with that in mind, it was innovative, though. I mean, it was, it was like, Jim always was, he was always thinking outside the box. And it wasn't technically fair to just ban it the way they did, but they did, and that's it. It also had to do with the fact that it had movable aerodynamic devices on it. The skirts moved, and they were a function of the aerodynamic suction of the car and blah, blah, and all of that. So that was their rationale. But yeah, the Can-Am was just amazing. And the interesting thing that, people talk about the Can-Am being killed because of Mark Donohue and the 91730, but, they kind of forget that, McLaren dominated that series unbelievably for, a number of years. In fact, going up until that Can-Am race in 1970, McLaren had won something like 26 out of 29 of the prior races and all of the races in the year before. And, so it was not exactly competitive. It was really a matter of who was going to come in third and fourth and down the road, not first or second, because that was always going to be Bruce or Denny. But just the sheer horsepower and the sound and the speed was just phenomenal. And then Road Atlanta, at the time, if you've been to Sebring back in the day, you can only appreciate what Road Atlanta meant to us Southerners, to go to a place that actually had nice bathrooms and it was scenic.
Well, wait a minute. It had hill. I got my racing license at Road Atlanta in 1990. Yeah. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Road Atlanta.
Yeah. And so we loved Road Atlanta. What a beautiful track that is. And I had a great time. But it was fun to do the Can-Am. I mean, that whole era was just, very magical. And the drivers were wonderful. All of them were just approachable. You could, they'd be sitting there in the pits and you could just walk up and sit next to them and talk. And they were great.
Now, speaking of which, did you get a chance to talk to Jim Chaparral? Jim Hall and Vic Elford drove that car, right?
Yeah. Well, I interviewed both of them for the book.
Okay.
I said, in the day, I was like 19, 20 years old, and these guys were idols. They were gods to me. So, and Dan Gurney, was my hero, but I just couldn't walk up to him and introduce myself and talk to him. I kind of regret that, but later on when I did the books, yes, I called him up and I tape recorded the interviews. I've got hundreds of tapes of my interviews with Jim Hall and Vic Elford, and I actually I got to be fairly friendly with because later in the 2000s, I helped Dr. Fred Simeone start his museum in Philadelphia. And Vic came to the museum several times to do presentations on Porsche and stuff. The museum has the hippie 917 Porsche that raced at Le Mans in 1970. And so, Vic would come and talk about his days racing Porsche, and especially the 917, because, he and I would have to say, he's probably the most noted, of course, Brian Redmond, definitely, and Pedro and Seppi Siffert. But, Vic was always acknowledged, especially because he drove it that year in 1969 when very few other drivers would get into that car. It was so diabolical. But he said his years of rallying and driving rally cars made it so it didn't bother him that much. He was used to a car being totally out of control, and 917 was. So he said the 917 didn't bother him. What he wanted was a car that was faster than anybody else's, and that's what he got with the 917.
Well, he was on our show. We had him back many years ago, and I regret that he's gone, and he wish he was here because I'd love to get him on again. But he said, kind of like his claim to fame is, he tamed the 917.
Yeah.
And because I had Brian Redmond on, and Brian Redmond said the same thing. He says he took that car out for a drive, and the back end of the thing wanted to come off the air. And so in 69, he wouldn't drive it. He went back to either 910 or 908.
Or 908, yeah.
Yeah, and Vic was the only one that would drove it. And then, of course, by 70, it got pretty refined.
Yeah,
and
they figure it out, especially, with a short tail. They figured that out with, Wire and John Horseman. Yeah.
All right, so we got a few minutes left here. So let's talk a little bit about the Simeone thing. And then you know what we're going to have to do, Harry? We're going to have to bring you on again. Just one too quick. And I can see, listen, you talked to Sebring and Daytona, which I've been going to since the 70s, and Road to Atlanta. So those are really my favorite tracks on the East Coast. I'm from California, so it's Sonoma and Laguna. But I want to talk a lot more about that stuff. And because I went to a lot of the races and you were there, so we got some commonality there. Also, did you work with Ken Breslauer at all?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, we got some Breslauer stories too then. Okay, so let's just talk a little bit about the Simeone real quick for the next couple of minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was very lucky. I had an advertising agency in Philadelphia, and I had downsized in the early 2000s, and we were moving into the city. We were going to move into Center City after our kids left, and Fred Simeone at that time, I had known him for a number of years and helped him with a couple of things. And he said, well, look, I bought this building. I'm going to put my museum in there, and I've got some office space. Why don't you, move your office in here and you can help me, and because I'm going to need brochures and stuff like that. And so I went in there. I was actually in there a year before the museum even opened and got to see it as they were building it and have photos of all of that stuff, which is really, really interesting. But I got to know Fred, pretty well. And there are other people, of course, that are much, much closer to him than I was. But I had my office there, and it was amazing that a lot of guys have car collections, but Fred assembled this collection with a singleness of vision. He wanted these cars to represent the spirit of competition, how competition improves the breed. And in the same way that Darwinism affects evolution, that, the survival of the fittest is one thing is found to work better than something else, then it's adopted by the others. And so the cars in his collection are all racing sports cars with headlights and fenders that conceivably could have been driven on the road, as endurance cars were at the time. And as you go through the collection, which starts in the early 1900s, you can see how competition has evolved in the cars. The cars, instead of having narrow, tall tires, they get lower and wider. The aerodynamics change. The engine goes from being in the front to being in the back. All of this, the brakes go from being cable operated to hydraulic. In fact, he has the car that was the very first automobile ever to have hydraulic brakes, which was the Duesenberg, was one of the team cars of the 1921 French Grand Prix. He happens to have the only surviving, or at least as far as we know right now, the only surviving example of the Duesenberg team cars. So it's a remarkable collection by a remarkable man. He was a neurosurgeon, but he did not start out as a rich man. He grew up in the Kensington district of Philadelphia, which is a very poor area. His father was a doctor, but he was a family doctor, didn't have a lot of money, but loved automobiles. And
Harry, hold that thought, because we're up against the clock here. I want to thank you very much for coming on the show. Real quick, shout out how people can find out more about you real quick and on your Facebook page.
Well, go to Glory Days of Racing Facebook group, and you can look through it there and put in a comment, and we'll select you to join it. And then also I have a website, www.glorydaysofracing.com, with information and photos.
Super. Harry, we will have you back. I'm sorry I didn't mean to cut it short, but you know how it is. We just got the checker flag. Harry, thank you very much. I want to thank a very, very special guest, Harry Hurst. And be sure to check out this Facebook page, Glory Days of Racing. In the meantime, I want to tell all my listeners, don't forget, every Tuesday night between 7 and 8 p.m. here at the TAN Talk Radio. See some of the car shows. Meet them this weekend. Stay safe, drive carefully, and love your family.
Bring on to the other side. Bring on to the other side. Bring on to, bring on to, bring on to, bring on to.
WTAN, Clearwater.
FM 106.1.
WDCF, Dade City.
FM 102.3.
WZHR, Zephyrhills.
FM 104.3.
Listen.
This is CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by Liberty Mutual Insurance.
I'm Jennifer Kuiper. In Chicago, the man accused of firing into an Independence Day parade crowd north of Chicago has been charged. Lake County State's Attorney Eric Reinhart.
The Lake County State's Attorney's Office has charged Robert Cremo III with 7 counts of first-degree murder for the killing spree that he has unleashed against our community.
According to police.